Well, hello, my beautiful Badger peeps. Welcome back to another episode of the Gritty Glitter Badger podcast. I'm your host, Krista, and I like to smash myths. That getting stronger is just about the muscles that you see. And, around here, it's about the muscles that you can see, but it's also about the muscles that you can't see, right? The mental muscles, that mental resilience, the mental fitness. And, it's grit under pressure, that gratitude, and the heart it takes to keep showing up. And today, or thinking about this, actually, when I was listening to his podcast the other day, and I went back and I reflected on some previous training and training notes and things like that. And I wanted to dive into a lesson that I learned from one of my one of two of my CrossFit coaches. I had two CrossFit coaches. And this one is from Ben Bergeron, who was with ComTrain. He was my coach when I was training as a CrossFit Masters athlete. And it was a lesson that changed not just how I approached training, right? But how I approached life. And it's about the way that we frame our work, the way that we name it, and the way that we see ourselves in the totality of the process. And it started with one single word: practice. So I just want to cruise on in straight into the topic of the day. Life is practice. How one lesson from my coach changed the way I train and live. And this was a quiet shift. It changed everything for me. There's this thing that happens in sports and strength training that most people don't talk about. We get locked into the grind, right? We got the checklist. We have the training session. We've got all the sets, the reps, everything laid out. All of it, right? It's all there. And it's the shoulds. And we start seeing, at least for me, seeing training as the thing we have to do, right? Another appointment on the calendar. Because I talk about that. Talk about it, make it a health appointment, right? Make it like so you see it. And that can be it's like another box to tick off or another notch in the bell of being disciplined. And I'm not undermining discipline because it matters. But when discipline hardens into obligation, then the joy starts to leak out, right? And that curiosity dries up, and the spark that got us into the game in the first place starts to flicker. And, I've been in this world for decades as an athlete, a coach, a competitor, a teacher, and I've seen every flavor of it for me burn out. I've seen every flavor of burnout in myself. I've seen it in other people, right? And there's one moment, like one shift that rewired the way that I showed up. And it wasn't just in the gym, but it was in my life. It happened, it happened when, again, like I said, when I was training as a CrossFit Masters athlete with Ben Bergeron and ComTrain, and it was a Zoom call. It was a Q&A. People could send in questions. We were going to have talking about all kinds of things, and he talked about it came up in the conversation that we're, it's not about we're going to train today. He looked at us, he started talking about it, and he said, I want us to remember that we are here to practice, and in that moment, because I had a question, there were a lot of questions and things like that. And I didn't think much of it, right? I figured it was just, okay, I get it. Like, I understand that. And, his mindset and, the things that I learned from him in terms of that, like, you know, this is his style. And I'm like, okay, cool. Right. And, but I didn't think about a lot in depth at that moment. But then when it kept coming up and I kept thinking about it, right? Session after session, and that word really started to work on me, and it kept showing up, and it was like a slow drip, right? And practice, it wasn't just to train. It wasn't just grind. It wasn't just always getting after it, because those things mattered. But it was like, look, every time we train, what we're doing is we are practicing to get better. It was subtle, it wasn't this big seismic thing that happened that, like rocked my world. It happened in a very slow way. And, this word matters more than you think. Language is a lens, right? And, when we change the lens, the whole picture begins to shift, right? Training felt like a test, and which in some ways it was, right? But practice felt like an invitation, and training was proving, about proving something, better numbers, better, output, things like that. But practice was about exploring, and there he always talked about, like, the four levels, right? There's the pessimist, the optimist, the realist, and the warrior. And the warrior always comes from a space of curiosity, energetic curiosity, right? And training, while it carried the weight of performance, practice carries that lightness of curiosity and being open to the opportunity, right? Because when you hear practice, your brain softens and your shoulders drop a little bit. And you remember that you're there to learn, to explore, and to test things out, right? And it's not about nailing it every time, because every time you train, it's not every training session is going to be this golden star, right? It's about showing up, seeing what you've got in the tank that day, and then being open to pivot and adjust it. And, that's what that's what Ben Bergeron had cultivated in all of his athletes, in his gym, and anybody who, worked with him, who did comp train, everything like that, right? Every lift, every drill, every metabolic conditioning piece was an opportunity to try something new, or, to refine something old, right? It removed the heaviness of perfection. And what it did was it replaced it with that curiosity, that warrior mindset. And it took it from obligation to opportunity. So think about the difference between I have to train and I get to practice. One sounds like a chore, it's heavy, it's overwhelming, it's obligatory, right? And the other, it sounds like a privilege, because it is. Because when you shift that, have to get to, and he talked about this a lot, have to get to, you're not just changing your vocabulary, you're changing your relationship with the work, right? And that I have to, it drags you into a gym with a sigh. The I get to, you walk in with a spark and you have this vim and this vigor and you're open, right? And here's the kicker about that, the spark changes the quality of your reps. Like when I step up to a barbell, um, this is something else I learned. I always ask myself, like, very quickly, and it's such a habit now, how great can I be at this? Not, oh, guys, like, look at all the, man, there's so many cookies on that plate. Like, oh my God, or that bar, it just looks heavy, like all the, and it's like not going into overwhelm. Like, let's see how great I can be at this, right? Totally different mindset. And it changes how you listen to your body, and it changes how you recover, and it changes how you carry yourself outside of the gym. That moment you change how you see the lift, that translates directly to life on the daily. And here's the thing, curiosity and judgment, they can't live in the same space. Like when you approach a training session with that energetic curiosity, what will I learn today? How will this feel? What happens if I tweak my stance or my breathing, or, let's see how great I can be at this. You're removing that fear of failure, and failure doesn't exist in practice. You're only getting feedback. And, if I missed a lift, or, it wasn't the greatest, or like, I suck at this, it was, something like, okay, well, my timing was off, or like that pull, I was on my toes, like something like that, you know, um, those notes become fuel for the next rep, the next day, the next cycle, as opposed to like, I suck at this. that's a total different, aspect of seeing things, right? And when you start to see the misses as data, that's just feedback. Instead, it's proof that instead of, it's proof that you're not enough, or, I suck at this. It's like, for me, what happens is I stop white knuckling my progress. I can take a deep breath, right? And you start playing again. And, the day that I realized it wasn't just about the barbell, I can't pinpoint an exact moment, but, I know that somewhere along the line, I realized that this wasn't just a training thing, it was a life thing. And that actually happened for me with both of my CrossFit coaches. Both it happened, betwixt the two, Michaela North, who was my first, and Ben Bergeron, who then was my second and became my master's coach ultimately. And it's that every single morning that we wake up, that it's a practice. We're not here to perfect life, right? We're here to practice living it the best that we can. And whatever happened yesterday, whether you crushed it or crashed, it's data. And you take that and you adjust it, you pivot, right? And you bring it into the next day. It's like the 3 A's of situational growth, right? And where it's you appraise, you adapt, and you act. And, it's just like in the gym, missed an opportunity. Okay, well, that's feedback. Did you struggle with your patience? That's feedback, right? You nailed your boundary setting with a specific energy vampire. Also, feedback, right? And life is just this one long string of mental reps, right? Some are clean, some are chaotic, shitty, and messy, but they all count, right? And I want to also discuss, I want to talk about that gift of get to. When you shift that have to get to, your relationship with your own life, it really starts to change. And, I don't have to deadlift today. I don't have to go and do my shoulder exercises today, working on the giant cap section of the shoulders and the details, right? I don't have to do that. I get to, right? I don't have to cook dinner. I get to. I don't have to walk my dogs. I get to. And this isn't toxic positivity. I just want to put that out there right now, because we have this whole toxic positivity thing. I swear to God, everything today has a fucking label and it drives me crazy. All I'm talking about is perspective, because there's going to be a day, and hopefully for all of it's far, far down the line, you're no longer going to get to do things that you take for granted, right? When you start to see each rep, each task, each interaction as a gift, it's not about romanticizing the grind. This is about respecting it, respecting the opportunity to be here, to try again, to keep practicing, right? And, that athlete mindset goes way beyond the gym. Athletes, and especially, and because, I can speak from this as a former masters athlete, I feel like we know this better than most is that, we're in it for the long game, and if you're still moving, you're still competing, you're still pushing edges, decades into our training, right? It's like we understand the goal isn't just to win. It's also about, continuing to show up, and practice isn't something that you graduate from either. It's a lifelong commitment to refinement. And you practice the skill, you practice the mindset, you practice the recovery. And then when you can frame things in that way, there's no arbitrary finish line, right? You're not done when you hit a PR or cross a stage. You're simply evolving into the next version of yourself. And when life throws you a curveball, because it will, this mindset is gold, right? This mindset is top standard, top shelf, right? Instead of collapsing into the why me, oh my God, this ruins everything. Like, you can step back and you can say, okay, this is today's practice. How can I navigate this, right? And some days practice looks like you're chasing like a triple extension snap under the bar. Other days you're practicing, what looks like holding your ground in a hard conversation or getting through a grocery trip without losing your shit, and all the people around you who keep cutting you off or, bumping into your cart or whatever it is. Or perhaps it's finding breath when everything feels tight, because both count and both build you. Feedback over failure is important. Ben Bergeron was always, big on nobody left a failed attempt without knowing what they'd try differently the next time. And, this was a culture, and I imagine it's still a culture, feedback first, ego second. And something else too and I talked about this in a previous podcast, and this is from a purely physical aspect, but Katrin Davidsdottir also talked about this a lot. If, you had like a shitty rep, or you did like a Metcon and there was an exercise in it that just didn't, your body just, it was like so wonky and off, going off to the side. And even if you have to like drop the weights lower or whatever it is, and just do a couple that felt good. It's like you're not ending on a bad note. You're telling your body, like, this is how we're ending it. And so it can feel what it feels like to end it. That feedback, it's getting feedback to feel what it feels like, right? Off of having something that didn't feel, it felt less than. And, it's like, instead of beating yourself up, right? It's using your inner coach, right? With the same with life. If you treat every day as practice, you're collecting this feedback, and instead of failures, right? And then your inner critic, it starts to quiet down. Bruno, my noisy roommate, he gets a little quieter, and then the inner coach can step in, right? And instead of beating yourself up for what you didn't do perfectly, then you can start asking things like, okay, what's the rep that I can do differently tomorrow? And I've built my own personal ritual around this now, at the end of the day, and I've talked about this often, it does, if I'm sitting, drinking my tea, or my husband and I are, we're trying to be really good about incorporating doing nighttime mobility to relax us for sleep. And we're we're getting there. I think we need to set the goal of doing it once a week for a couple of weeks, and then, because it's like we'll do it, and then like days will go by, like, oh, I forgot. But anyway, doing mobility stretching, or for me, it's like you do the highlight reel in bed, like the good things, right? Just running through those, and then asking myself two things: what did I learn today, and how can I practice it tomorrow? Right? It keeps it simple, but it keeps it grounded. It keeps me grounded in the fact that I'm always a work in progress. And that's the point, right? And that's not a flaw. It's, it it is how we grow and how we evolve. And when you adapt the quote unquote practice mindset, it doesn't just change your training or your own life. Like, it changes how you interact with everyone else as well. And you stop expecting people to be perfect all the time. And it's like, because you recognize, look, we're all practicing every single day, right? And you start seeing your relationships as living, breathing things that you get to show up for, right? You get to tweak it and you get to refine it, and your patience deepens, right? And your grace starts to expand. And then, like, weirdly enough, your standards stay high and they continue to rise, but they're rooted from a place of compassion and not criticism. And I think this is why training, with being one and training with masters athletes is so powerful, is because we know that stakes are different now, right? We've had the injuries, we've had the setbacks, we've had those life interruptions, and we felt the edges of what's possible, and we've come back anyway. And we're not just lifting, not just for numbers anymore. We're lifting for longevity, for joy, for the privilege of still being able to move like this now and decades to come. And we're practicing the art of staying in the game. So if you've been feeling like, life is an endless string of have tos, just try this. Like, for the next week or so, replace I have to with I get to, and then see what happens, right? And, I get to go to work, or I get to train, I get to call my dad. I get to fold this pile of laundry because I have clothes. It's funny because I love doing laundry. I love putting it in the washer. I love putting it in the dryer. I love getting it out. I love smelling it. I love folding it, putting it away. Like I have 3 baskets, right? I'm sorry, three. I have 4 baskets I'm looking at. I can see from my office, but it's reminding myself, how great is it that I get to do the laundry and I get to look at all of the great clothes I have, all of the laundry that I have, right? Because I have clothes and I have laundry and I have a home to keep them in and I have a washer and dryer to wash and dry them in, right? It's not about pretending that, folding the laundry and putting away is thrilling. I mean, maybe it is for some people, but it's not my top, right? It's about recognizing the very fact that you can do it. It means you're alive. It means you're resourced and you're in motion. And, it's that get to shift. It's it's a gratitude without glitter glue, right? Perspective without the preach. And here's the thing, once you start playing with this reframing, right, it starts to bleed into, places you didn't expect it. Like I call them badass badger reframes, right? And, in the gym, we know it's the little things, the warm up sets and the accessory work and the mobility drills, right? And the corrective work and all of those little nuances. They are what keep the big lifts moving forward. And they're not glamorous. It's not the sexy stuff that people show online and the fitness influencers and all those things, right? They don't get the Instagram reel, but they're the glue. And life's the same way, saying good morning to your neighbor or, refilling your water when you're parched, which is going to happen to me because I've drank through the 2 huge bottles that I have while I podcast. Taking 3 deep breaths before you answer that email, right? Choosing to walk instead of scroll for 10 minutes. And these are the micro reps, like the little stretch reps. They're the practice and they're the things that over time they build resilience, capacity, and presence. And when you see them as a practice, instead of, oh, it's just stuff that I have to do, you start to value them differently. And let's be real, these days when practice feels, it can feel like it's a waste of time, some days, not all days, but some days. And when you can show up, your body's flat, your brain's foggy, and you wonder why you even bothered, it's like you get to do it. You go through the motions and you leave feeling like, better than you did before, but maybe you didn't move the needle as much as you wanted to. But here's the truth, because practice isn't about all of the fireworks every time. It's about keeping the thread unbroken, and it's about showing up even when the conditions aren't perfect. Because let's be honest, they're not going to always be perfect, if they're even going to be perfect, right? And it's that, those what you feel is a pointless practice are actually scaffolding that holds up when the big moments come, and they compound one on the other. And I also want to talk about here briefly is something, one of the coolest things about practice is that the body remembers, right? Every rep that you've done, every pull, every push, every breath under load, it leaves a trace, right? Even if you take time off, even if you get injured, even if life pulls you in 825,000 directions for a specific, a certain season of your life, the body, it keeps a long memory. And it's the same with life skills, right? Every time that you practice patience or listening or speaking up for yourself, right? You've laid down a groove in your nervous system, and you might not need it for months, maybe years, but when the moment comes, you'll find yourself sliding into that groove, like you've never left it. And that's the payoff of practice. It's cumulative, it compounds, it stacks, and it waits for you. And, if you stay curious and you stay engaged, you stay willing to continue that practice, that's, that's when practice is a compass, when you start seeing life as the practice and you stop obsessing over the finish line and you start paying attention to the direction that you're moving. Like, Am I practicing being a kind person, you know, but I'm not a doormat? It's like knowing the difference between the two. Am I practicing the habits that support my health, my relationship, my work? Am I practicing values that I say that I believe in? You know, it's not about being perfect today. It's about pointing yourself toward the place where you want to go and then taking the next step and the next rep in that direction. Practice doesn't guarantee perfection. Practice guarantees progress, right? And every session you show up to, whether it's in the gym or in life, it's a brick in the foundation that you are building. And some bricks go straight in, right? Some are going to wobble and some you're going to have to pull out and you're going to have to, not have to. Some you pull out and you get to reset. But if you keep practicing, that structure is going to have a strong base and it will stand, right? And when the storm comes, and they will, you'll be ready. So here's the takeaway. A mental post-it note. You're not obligated to train today, right? You are invited to practice and you're not stuck in the same day on repeat. You get to treat each sunrise as a fresh start line, right? Collect the feedback, keep the curiosity, and don't waste your reps inside the gym or out. So go practice something today, not because you have to, but because you get to. And remember, we're all just practicing until the day we're not. So let's always think about it and let's make our reps count.